Hey, thanks for checking out this video. So last weekend was Mother's Day here in the UK, and don't worry, I'm pretty sure it's not the same day for every country, so you probably haven't missed it if you didn't know about it. I started this drawing a while back, aiming to have it done for Mother's Day. It's a very special piece for me, as it's a self-portrait with my son based on my all-time favourite photo of us together. I always loved how cuddly and wrapped up we are, so I added some extra elements to help really emphasise the embrace, such as the longer hair and some flowers that sort of like really wrap around. I think it worked out pretty well. For this, I used graphite pencil to transfer the sketch, some charcoal and Faber-Castell polychromos pencils for the finer details, but it was mostly done with PanPastel, which I want to take a bit of time to talk about as I just love them. For anyone who's unfamiliar with them, they are just a soft pastel packed into these little pots. It looks a bit like makeup, but it goes on the paper so much smoother than if you've ever tried like the pencil pastels or those little chalk pastels. I've always found them to be really scratchy and just a horrible feeling when making it art, and it just always put me off. But I have to say, the PanPastels are just nothing like that. They feel really buttery and smooth, and they just blend really well with one another. They're pretty expensive, so I only have a few. I think I have a black, a white, a red, a burnt sienna, and a gold and a silver, although I don't use all of those in this video. But the biggest downside to them, in my opinion, are the tools. You'll see quite a lot in this video. I use a blue palette knife looking tool, and it is my favourite. It comes with changeable covers, but sadly they break really easily, and it does create texture, so you have to replace them if you want a smoother blend. I think I maybe went through 6 or 7 of them just for this drawing alone. They do also have other sponges that don't go on the palette knife tool that seem to last a lot better, but you can't create finer details with them. You'll see me use one of them. It's an oval sponge, and I think I use it on the hair later on. I have heard other artists just recommending using cheap makeup sponges and applicators, but I just don't find them to work anywhere near as well as the actual branded tools. Now, although that does sound like quite the downside, the PanPastels themselves are just such a pleasure to use and so much fun. And since making the change from digital art to traditional art, they're the first medium that I immediately felt comfortable with. I almost felt like I had control from the beginning, and that never happens when I'm trying a new medium out. So in the video, you can see a piece of paper with a printed sketch on it. This is because I like to create and edit my sketches in Photoshop, then print them out and transfer them that way. It comes in handy quite a lot as I use it to rest my hand on to protect against smudging, just in case you were wondering why I'm often covering up the work with it. That's what I'm doing. And if anyone would like to see how I create my digital mock-ups and sketches to then print out, let me know. I'm sure I could record that part of the process too. At this point, I'm trying to fix the boy's face. The blending just wasn't as smooth as I would have liked, so I'm erasing it and trying again. You're going to be seeing me do this quite a lot. Often I find that I'll keep going with an area until I feel like I'm stuck, then I'll stop and work on another bit and just keep hopping around until I either get stuck or I'm happy with it, and then I just keep going until it's finished. You'll see I just erased a flower. I think it was a lily. Originally, I loved the idea of having more flowers, but the more I looked at it, the more crowded and overly complicated it looked. So I just got rid of it, and I'd actually forgotten it was even in the original sketch, so I obviously don't miss it. So while I'm blocking in a new area, I'll just talk a bit about my process and how I approach it. I'm using grey toned paper, which works really well for me and my digital art background, as I always preferred to have a flat mid-tone, because then I could go lighter for the highlights and darker for the shadows, and it just felt much easier than starting with a pure white and being made to go darker and darker, because I'd always be worried about going too dark and then I'd miss out on a really good value range and it would look terrible in the end. So I do the same thing here. I'm already starting with a mid-tone because of the paper, and then I add the shadows with the black, and then I'll almost sort of pull that black back into the grey, creating a gradient to help it blend. And then I do the same for the highlights. I'll add the white and I'll blend that back into the grey again on the opposite side to hopefully create a sense of depth. Basically, I'm just letting the paper's grey tone show through to create the middle tone in the drawing and not directly creating it myself. I try to avoid mixing the black and the white directly, as the grey that they create is not the same grey as the paper, and it feels as though it clashes and it just looks really ugly. I do accidentally do this on, I think it's on a strand of hair near the eyes of the girl, but another great thing about PanPastel is that they're erasable to a degree. Because I found with the black, especially once it's been layered on quite a bit, it can become quite hard to erase completely. In fact, you see me do that towards the end of the video. So although I love this medium and have so far found it the easiest to blend, I do sometimes still struggle with a smooth gradient, especially with the darker areas, but I believe that's just something that hopefully anyway I'll learn with practice. You'll see in this video a lot that I reworked the boy's face. In fact, I spoke about it briefly earlier, but that's just because I'm not happy with how I've blended it. It's also pretty tough as his face is all smushed and naturally doesn't look quite right the more that you stare at it, even in the reference photo. I do feel this medium is easier to rework though, so for example erasing parts and going over, there is a limit to how much can be done without either damaging the paper or it becoming permanent, especially with the darker tones, but all around I don't think it's too bad. At this point I'm just trying to add some highlights and depth to the hair without going too over the top. Like I mentioned earlier, when mixing the black and white PanPastel, it creates a different grey to that of the paper, which kind of clashes. So instead I'm trying to erase the black, that way the grey of the paper can show through again, rather than going over the top with the white and directly mixing those two shades. And then I can just add small highlighted strands with a white pastel pencil. After that, I'm sort of just picking at everything, adjusting the values, so I'm pushing the areas a bit darker, or fixing the hard edges, just really jumping from area to area, trying to refine things a bit more before starting on the flowers. And now time for the colour. I'll be honest, I didn't really know how to approach this as I'm quite inexperienced with drawing flowers, so I just took it one step at a time by adding the darker areas of the flower and blending them back into the grey toned paper, leaving room for highlights, just kind of like what I've been doing with the black and white areas really. Once I've got the basic colours and highlights down, I just go back over them with a white pastel pencil to define the edges a bit more. And then again I start picking at areas that need more refining or parts that I just don't quite like. For example, the hair on the forehead, I lowered it to make it look more natural, and again then just pushing the darker values some more to increase the depth. And now the fun part. From the start I knew that I wanted to add some gold to this piece, and I toyed with the idea of it being done with watercolour as I already had a gold in that, but the test that I tried didn't really work, so I splurged and I bought the gold PanPastel, which I'm just so glad that I did because it is stunning. And I wasn't entirely sure what to do, so I quite tamely just outlined everything to see how I liked that first. I want a quick appearance from my cat Gigi, who is just obsessed with trying to eat my brushes and pencils. And back to the gold. I decided I wanted to try a circle, almost sort of representing a sun behind us and hopefully adding a bit more warmth to the piece. I'd actually lightly outlined the circle using a regular plate from my kitchen, but I wasn't sure that it would work out, so I didn't record me doing it, but that's how that guide got there in case you wondered. I ended up really liking the composition with it there, so I just went for it. It's coming towards the end now, so again I'm just being super picky and trying to make things look better without overworking it. Sometimes I think you can just do too much and it'll look worse for it. But then on the other hand, you don't improve by never trying to push yourself further. It's a tough one really. My favourite part is always right at the end, where I can add my final highlights with the white pastel pencil if that's what I'm working in, just to make everything stand out and look really sharp. So one last adjustment, I really disliked how I had a couple of strands of hair at the back that ended up really fighting against the composition, and I actually felt like quite distracting. I couldn't seem to make it look any better, so I decided to erase it as best I could, but because it was quite dark there, it still left a mark on the paper. So as a compromise, I thickened the gold outline to try and cover it, and it actually worked pretty well. You can't really see it in the final piece. And that about wraps it up. I'm still very new to PanPastels, and I'd love to hear your own experiences with them, or even which other traditional mediums you found the easiest, or maybe even what was the hardest for you personally. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like, and if you want to see more, then hit that subscribe button. Thanks, bye!